It's 1966. A restless college dropout named Larry Ellison is sitting in a cramped apartment on the south side of Chicago. His adoptive father has just told him, again, that he's wasting his life. Ellison shrugs, lights another cigarette, and turns back to a borrowed computer manual. He's broke, brilliant, and utterly convinced the world runs on bad ideas, and that he can outthink them all. What he doesn't know yet is that he'll one day become one of the richest men on earth, that he'll build Oracle, a company born from defiance, audacity, and an obsession with control. And somewhere along the way, he'll take cues from a Holocaust survivor turned congressman, Tom Lantos, who believed in him when no one else did, and trade sailing lessons with his friend, Steve Jobs, another rebel with a different religion, perfection. This is the story of Larry Ellison, the billionaire who saw business as combat, technology as empire, and life as a contest of willpower. Welcome to Leaders, where we explore the leaders who don't just shape industries, they bend the world to their vision. Here we are, episode 51. Larry Ellison of Oracle fame. Larry is a interesting, long-tenured CEO of Oracle, one in which many people have been more accustomed to and in the news of recently with this entire AI boom. And in a few days, he overtook Elon Musk as the richest person on the world for a short time. And so let us tell us the story of his leadership journey and who he was. So this episode will lean heavily on the book Soft War, an intimate portrait of Larry Ellison and Oracle by Matthew Simmons, with commentary by Larry himself. And definitely we'll take from excerpts here of the book to try to understand who he was, who his leadership style was, and some key people along the way. Let's start with one excerpt from the chapter that he's trying to understand some blame that things go wrong and some delegation that he had put on other people, and extreme delegation in that sense. It was a form of self-indulgence rather than a brilliant insight into how to get the best from talented managers of his extreme delegation. And one thing in common with what we study within Larry is that his leadership changed over the years of when he first developed Oracle back in the 80s to now where he stands today. And he says, you cannot run a company without strong checks and balances. His defense today is still pretty much what it was at the time. He was naive and inexperienced, but he knows that it's not enough to absolve him, he adds. I just wasn't paying proper attention to my job. I was doing only the things that interested me. It was the same problem I had in school, but this happened in my 40s. I wasn't a kid anymore. Exactly. The truth is that Ellison found almost everything about running a company, other than creating a vision of what the technology could do and driving the product development strategy to achieve it, boring and in some sense beneath him. But later, after he realized he had a duty to know about the supposedly tedious details of how a sales force should be compensated and revenue recognized, he discovered it wasn't so dull and trivial after all. So Larry, as a person, and part of his identity is one in which he was attracted a lot to the product and developing that, and as an early programmer and understanding that and all the different iterations of product that Oracle has gone through the years, predominantly now within AI, of course. But one common thing that has made him successful as a leader, and as we've seen this with other leaders that we've studied, is to navigate change and tremendous change. And so he writes within the book here, he kind of includes footnotes to some of the commentary that the author has in some cases. And so in this case, he writes that it has been my experience that people reflexively resist change. Change requires people to rethink the way they work and the way that they are organized. When people write down their current processes and the reasons why these processes cannot be simplified, it forces them to carefully and methodically think their business. This usually results in business processes being changed as opposed to our software. Simplified, modernized business processes are at least as important as good business software in delivering efficiencies to the enterprise. When we do turn up a serious shortcoming in our software, we add the required feature in a future version of the product at no charge. So that's the way his mind kind of thinks, and certainly one in which, from a work ethic standpoint, he definitely has one that is rare as well, and one, again, excerpt that speaks to that is from early on. The author just wondered how committed he was to making Oracle as great as IBM was in its heyday. I thought that given his age, the range of his interest, his unimaginable wealth, and his own self-confessed dislike of much of the routine drudgery that's involved in running any business, as we pointed to earlier, it was almost inconceivable that he would have the necessary stamina and the hunger. Two things made me realize that I had underestimated him. The first was his evident willingness to put in 14-hour days while on the road. The second was sitting in on the meetings in Oracle's 11th floor boardroom, from which he drives and directs the company. This was not a quote-unquote big picture chief executive who passively absorbs sanitized briefings at 10,000 feet from nominal subordinates who are actually running the business. Whether he was suggesting a solution to some obscure engineering issue concerning the database, deconstructing some back office process at Oracle to understand what was needed from applications to automate a business flow seamlessly, tweaking a sales compensation plan to eliminate perverse incentives, designing a portlet for Oracle's executive dashboard, penning the latest ad, or sharpening an online sales presentation, Ellison was everywhere. Nor did it strike me that he was interfering with the work of others for the sake of it, although most of the people who work at Oracle are formidably intelligent. He constantly probes and refines, seems to both put them on their mettle and genuinely to add value. He also constantly monitored every shift in his competitors' business tactics or product strategies, ensuring that Oracle could rapidly exploit any emerging weakness or block off any new threat. So as we've mentioned here within a lot of these leaders, they are very hands-on. And if anything, that excerpt of his work ethic is one in which he is very involved in the details, doing lots of different things, not considered to be kind of a micromanager per se, but wanting to understand what is going on and providing his perspective and leadership on the most pressing problems of his company at any given time. And so a great excerpt there that really speaks to what he describes as he's a sprinter and not a grinder. He's interested in that vision, product development, first and foremost. And over time, this has changed. In the 80s, he's early on forming the company, but over time, as that developed, he got really detached in the 90s, and he furiously involved himself much later on to what we described there. He's a control freak, definitely has extreme confidence, and that shows through within the book and some of the stories. Optimist, kind of a cult-like leader in terms of his charisma, definitely being pegged also as reckless, and also questions conventional wisdom as to how things are done. Again, a common trait that we've seen across others, and one in which really stands out from episode 22. Elon Musk and Larry Ellison are good friends as well, and I certainly see lots of different similarities within how they approach the business and maybe how they're perceived from the outside of their personality and leadership style. He really has a mentality of finding a way and just doing it. When you innovate, you've got to be prepared for everyone telling you you're nuts, he says. And really, his focus from a product sense, we can see from another excerpt from the book here. As far as Ellison was concerned, it says, overwhelmingly the most important contribution he could make to Oracle's success was to really concentrate on making the product better, so that's where he focuses his time mostly. He simply didn't regard himself as competent to concern himself with all the other things that a CEO is supposed to be responsible for. To some at Oracle, his approach was one of enlightened delegation. You could say that, he says, but it was closer to abdication than delegation. In fact, he had every reason to concentrate on the product. When he forces or sees competition, which they come across a lot of different times here, he's the one who step in and say what should be different from the product side of things. And that all leads really to what his leadership is, and his opinion on the general topic of leadership is one in that you cannot lead if you are filled with uncertainty. So he has high conviction and really confident in terms of being a salesperson for Oracle, believing that his solution is the one for customers and those sort of things. And so definitely one in which he did not have the natural, I would say, ability to lead successfully right away, at least. Kind of rigid in terms of his approach to start, and certainly he would self-admit that. And one thing that he does within that, too, is that he sort of says when he was 14, he had an argument with his sister Doris. Then in his early 30s, she asked me the question, what's more important to you, to be loved or admired? I said, I'd like to be admired. She just said no, gave me her, you're just a stupid adolescent look, and left the room. It took me a long time to understand that we all want to be loved, even me. Imagine that. Anyway, I used to have a management style that earned neither love nor admiration. Rather than using conventional MBO management by objectives techniques, he invented his own style of management called MBR. MBR standing for management by ridicule. MBR is perfectly suited to a young, smartass programmer who just started his own company. A popular book at the time, The 1 Minute Manager, recommended that managers spend a minute a day praising their employees. MBR takes more time. You need to spend hours every day in meetings with your key senior people where you point out at length exactly why this person or that person's ideas are utterly ridiculous. Not everyone can do that. You've got to be good at intellectual intimidation and rhetorical bullying. According to MBR theory, your brilliant arguments establish a clear intellectual dominance that gives people the confidence to accept you and follow you, their leader. Interesting theory, isn't it? I was pretty brutal in attacking ideas and embarrassing people. I'd excuse my behavior by telling myself I was just having an open and honest debate. The fact is, I just didn't know any better. All my experience in business had been as a programmer. Programmers routinely play a game called Who's the Smartest Person in the Room? It's still a popular game at Oracle. I see it played all the time. When playing Wet Spinner, you get points by showing how irrational or suboptimal other people's ideals are. It happens in all disciplines to some extent, but programming is similar to math in that there are clear right and wrong answers, so there are clear winners and losers. It's classic primate behavior, figuring out where you are in the monkey trope. The author goes on to say, I thought that maybe his use of MBR was fairly typical of an insecure CEO trying to establish his leadership. He disagrees. No. And Larry writes, actually, in retrospect, I do agree. I was an inexperienced and insecure CEO trying to establish my leadership. Very embarrassing. In fact, CEO is a title that's looked down upon by most programmers. Remember, the name of the game is who's the smartest in the room, not who's got the most stars on their shoulders. There's very little respect for rank among programmers. Programmers have tremendous intellectual integrity, and you have to be able to clearly explain why something is right or wrong if you expect to win an argument. What is unnecessary and unacceptable is to humiliate people in public while you're explaining something. People didn't sign up for that, Oh, great, between 10 and 12, I get to go to a meeting and be publicly humiliated. I can't wait. It goes on to say, what was it that convinced Ellison that beating people up was not always the way of getting the best out of them? I was in a big meeting between Oracle and another company. The other company's CEO, an absolutely brilliant guy, started attacking ideas and people in a frightening, brutal, and destructive way. I was an MBR amateur compared to this guy. The overall dynamic in the room instantly changed. Everybody became afraid to talk because they didn't want to be intellectually embarrassed. But it was more than that. It was worse than that. People started to line up against this guy, not because he was wrong, he wasn't, but because he was inhumane. They grudgingly accepted that he was smart, but that didn't keep him from wanting him to fail. From then on, I was very careful about using MBR. Maybe it's okay for programmers, but it's certainly not okay for CEOs. It's hard enough to run a company. You don't want everyone rooting against you. 99% of the time, MBR is degrading to the practitioner and damaging to the business. Although he learned from those past mistakes, there are still aspects of the way he runs the company through these quite large meetings that can have some negative consequences. Ellison feels he has to perform to demonstrate his leadership and his prowess. Is it possible to be in both performance mode and listening mode? It makes picking up the nuances of a meeting more difficult and makes all the more dependent on a few trusted people. Safra Katz, who now is the CEO of Oracle, to tell him what he may be missing, and some very bright people who might have important contributions to make simply freeze in that kind of environment. And although he no longer practices MBR and now tries hard to encourage debate, there probably still isn't enough of it at Oracle. So in this case, the way he runs meetings is still kind of, in some cases, similar maybe to what we had viewed there. And more on his kind of management leadership style here. From the end of 1997 for at least 2 years, he admits kind of between Gary Bloom, he should be doing more one-on-ones. I feel my time is more efficiently spent in larger meetings where I can do a better job of gathering facts, debating, and communicating decisions. Harold Geenen, the man who built ITT, defined management as gathering facts and making a decision. He also said that the hardest thing for a manager to do is distinguish facts from true facts. I can get at the true facts much more easily when a couple layers of management are present at a meeting. The senior guys don't know the facts, and occasionally they don't want you to know the facts. The senior guys sometimes don't know the facts, and occasionally they don't want you to know the facts. Oracle's current management team has a much better grasp of the facts than any previously, and they never try to hide things. That makes my job easier these days. One more excerpt here on his leadership style to drive that point home. Another aspect of his bravura style is equally calculated leadership. One story and quote here to drive that home. You cannot lead if you're filled with uncertainty. Imagine two officers each leading a company of Marines up a hill. The first one says, "Men, we're going up this hill and we're going to kill every fucking enemy soldier on our way to the top. I'm going first and you're all going to make it to the top with me. I haven't lost one of you yet. Follow me, men." Cool, competent, and confident. I'm ready to follow that guy. The second guy says, "Men, we're going to try to take this hill. I have to admit that I don't know how many enemy soldiers are on this hill, and I've never really done anything like this before. But I'm willing to go first if you're willing to follow me. We might make it, we might not. There's no way to know for certain. Even if we make it to the top, it's highly likely that some of us will be killed. Follow me, men." Well, the second guy is impressively honest about his fears and uncertainties. Maybe he should become a psychotherapist, but there's no way anyone is following that guy anywhere. A great story there. And one other key person that influenced the leadership style and success of Larry Ellison is Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs we covered in episode 2. Very different people in terms of the way that they led and some of their qualities. And as we referenced in the beginning, Steve maybe more so into perfection. And let's kind of compare and contrast some key things in terms of their core motivation. Steve, ultimately at the end of the day, was his motivation was to create products that marry art and technology. Larry, really, his motivation is to win in business, technology, reputation. Steve's vision was singular, product focus for the most part, obsessed with user experience and design perfection. Larry's vision, on the other hand, broad, strategic, and empire building, focused on markets, dominance, and scale. In terms of the decision-making frameworks, Steve really was highly centralized. He was the final word on all kind of key creative decisions. As we've heard, Larry delegated more operationally but set aggressive goals and expected results. Risk appetite, I would say Larry took huge business risks, acquiring companies, betting early on databases and cloud. Steve, on the other hand, took some bold creative risks, the iPhone, but wanted total control of the execution of it. In terms of communication, Steve was an inspirational storyteller, to say the least. Persuasive through simplicity and vision. Larry was charismatic but combative, often used intellect and confidence to dominate the room. The tone that Steve sent was a demanding perfectionist. He sometimes was harsh but deeply product-driven. Larry can be really described as a strategic warrior, competitive, outspoken, loyal to high performers. The culture that Larry has built within Oracle is very, I would say, aggressive, sales-driven, results-oriented. Apple's culture that Steve helped build, design-led, secretive, idealistic. At the end of the day, Jobs led through product, and Ellison led predominantly through power. Jobs, you could say, was maybe more of a craftsman leader. He obsessed over every pixel, every corner radius, every experience. That power came from his taste and ability to inspire people to reach artistic perfection. Ellison was a strategist leader more so. He viewed the technology as a tool for dominance in markets, industries, narratives. He really built Oracle to outlast and outcompete, not necessarily to be beautiful along the way. So Steve, definitely a formidable figure. In addition to that, Tom Lantos, who was mentioned at the beginning here as well, was really a father figure to Larry early on in his career. So he met him, and Lantos, we could say, and we've covered this on other episodes, but really he was a key mentor and a moral anchor for Larry. Larry met Tom while studying at the University of Chicago in the mid-'60s. Lantos, he was then a young economics instructor with a remarkable personal story. He was a Holocaust survivor who had immigrated to the U.S. and rebuilt his life through education and moral conviction. He recognizes Larry's sharp intellect and restless ambition early on. Tom Lantos provided him with something his adoptive father never did: validation, direction, empathy. Lantos encouraged Larry to question assumptions, think globally, and believe in his intellectual potential. Ellison has said that Lantos was the first adult who saw something special in me. Larry ultimately dropped out of college and pursued a very wildly unconventional path to get to where he is today. That the intellectual and moral framework he absorbed from Lantos stayed with him. So the curiosity, the moral compass, the confidence, and the global perspective are ones in which were key, I would say, in terms of who Larry is from an identity and leadership standpoint. In addition to that, Bill Gates, who we will likely cover on a future episode here of Leaders. Again, very similar in terms of like a programmer at heart that built a tremendous business in Microsoft. And so comparing and contrasting Bill Gates with Larry Ellison at the time was an excerpt from the book. Although he always talked about technology and Oracle with passion and intensity, he didn't have the methodical relentlessness that Bill Gates, so formidable and feared, had. By his own admission, Ellison was not an obsessive grinder like Gates. He says, "I'm a sprinter. I rest, I sprint, I rest, I sprint again." Ellison had a reputation for being easily bored by the process of running the business, often took time off, leaving the shop. And so that's kind of Bill Gates, certainly from the Microsoft days in the mid '80s. He was definitely a grinder, very tremendously hardworking. In addition to that, one other key company at the time that Larry tried to sort of model off and really admired was IBM. IBM at that time was led by Lou Gerstner. Lou Gerstner we covered in a previous episode, and that was episode 15. He was a tremendous leader as well. And so Larry says Lou Gerstner turned IBM into a great service organization. You have money, we have people, want to trade. There's very little leverage in that. It's really just a bigger version of EDS, a big systems integrator and hosting firm founded by Ross Perot. But I don't think building lots of oil and lube places to service your car is a very good idea. What if someone builds a car that only requires the oil to be changed every 100,000 miles? IBM's service business model depends on computer technology remaining very complex and labor-intensive. IBM ran a series of ads showing a room full of business executives saying, "Good grief, if this merger goes through, we'll have 7 different platforms, 15 different databases, 14 different operating systems, a wireless product, and so on." Then you hear this woman's voice speaking to the room full of desperate execs, and the voice says, "And that's when you know it's time for IBM." In other words, computing is so enormously complicated that a normal business can't hope to understand or cope with it, so you should call an IBM. I have a different idea. Use better technology that's easier to understand. So he wanted to kind of model maybe some of what old IBM was, but doing it in obviously a very different way with Oracle. He says the old IBM strategy was creating value by creating intellectual property. The new IBM strategy is based on servicing complex systems. The more complex the system, the better it is for IBM. But if I'm right, and the industry turns away from these labor-intensive, highly customized, best-of-breed software systems, IBM's service business will slowly melt away like a glacier. The essence, the author says, of Ellison's hostility toward IBM is a form of intellectual snobbery. A company that was made great by its technology and applied engineering skills had lost its way and sold out. It was now run by sales and marketing guys who were cynically selling out the greatest name in American business. For the pragmatic Gerstner, remaking IBM as the solutions provider with the deepest bench has been a triumphant success. But it's easy to understand why Ellison sees the shift not only as an exploitable point of difference with Oracle's main competitor in the database market, but also a kind of betrayal. So more and more talk on IBM there, but certainly admired some of what Lou was able to reinvent IBM with, and really wanted to differentiate himself against that too. So, in summary, we've learned a lot from Larry's leadership style and the success of Oracle over time. Definitely navigating change very well. So, what exactly is the key takeaways and playbook that Larry had? 5 things kind of it boils down to here, I would say. 1 is that control is everything. Ellison avoided venture money like the plague. He'd take loans, cut deals, push sales, anything but give up equity. His belief was that power flows to the one who never dilutes. Number 2, sell harder than you build. Ellison knew technology really doesn't sell itself. He put marketing first. Average tech with great marketing beats great tech with average marketing. Number 3, hire for arrogance. Oracle famously asked recruits, "Are you the smartest person you know?" If yes, they were hired. If no, they hired the person they named. The result? A swaggering culture that competitors despise but couldn't beat. Competition is fuel. Ellison treated life as a contest. Lose a bike ride? He trained until he crushed you next time. Business was no different. He ran Oracle like every market share point was life or death. Number 5, find or make a way. When a wall blocked Oracle's computer hookup, Ellison grabbed a hammer and smashed through. That story became legend inside Oracle. Lesson: don't wait, force progress. So with that, we covered one of the most successful and richest business people in the world here, Larry Ellison. Certainly that success doesn't come if he didn't have key leadership qualities that we could study. Those kind of summed up in that playbook, but in addition to that, some of the stories and things that we shared here. And so episode 51, we covered Larry Ellison, and we will be back here soon for episode 52. Thanks for listening.